But here is Joy Reid, MSNBC, praise where praise is due. This, I think, is impressive, and it's good to see on the cable network, frankly, that, Democrats and the liberals are most likely to watch.
Early Saturday, an Israeli airstrike hit a school serving as a shelter in Gaza, killing at least 100 people and wounding nearly 50 others, according to Palestinian health authorities. On the same day as the strike, Vice President Kamala Harris condemned the loss of civilian life.
Yet again, there are far too many civilians who have been killed. I mean, Israel has a right to go after the terrorists that are Hamas. But as I have said many, many times, they also have, I believe, an important responsibility to avoid civilian casualties.
Uncommitted and anti-war voters see a reset with Harris on Israel and Gaza. Her language is different, capable of moving the needle and gaining favor with some of the voters who rejected President Biden over his stance on the region. But language is not enough. This was a school serving as a shelter for refugees of war, attacked during morning prayers. Witnesses said children, women, and old people were inside, sleeping, and that the school was hit without an evacuation warning from the IDF. President Biden has faced months of public pressure to cut off the supply of weapons to Israel amid its war on Gaza, which has killed about 40,000 people since October. It's why the squad, all elected officials of color, are demanding a ceasefire, despite being targeted for removal from office by staunch supporters of the Netanyahu government and the ongoing bombardment of Gaza. The world is on edge right now, and rightly so. The U.S. is sending more troops to the Middle East to bolster defenses as Israel braces for an attack by Iran. So far, Vice President Harris has shown herself to be better positioned than President Biden to bring the party together on this issue. But we have to remember, Harris is still the vice president serving in the Biden administration. So her policy, should it differ from Biden's, isn't anything that she can implement now. Though it's absolutely fair for people to ask, why are we giving bombs to Israel? And would she keep that policy in place as president? These questions will surely be visible during the Democratic National Convention next week. And how the party answers could impact the election, not to mention the lives of so many Palestinians who have suffered for much too long. For God's sake, this needs to end. And that is tonight's readout.
Good for her. Good for her. That's in the 7 o'clock hour. I hope somebody hears that. I don't know if they'll act on it. This story out of Haaretz, Israeli media. Israeli army uses Palestinian civilians to inspect potentially booby-trapped tunnels in Gaza. There's another way of saying that. The Israelis are using innocent Palestinians as human shields. And there's probably even another way of saying that, because when we hear that supposedly Hamas uses Palestinians as human shields, and therefore everything Israel does in killing Palestinian children, women, men, civilians, blowing up hospitals, blowing up schools, blowing up universities, blowing up 60-70% of the housing in that country, blowing up water treatment facilities, stopping aid. All that is because Hamas's fault, because they're using Palestinian civilians as shields. In other words, don't shoot us because you'll shoot these innocent civilians. Well, in this case, that's not what's going on here. They are literally, the Israelis are literally using innocent Palestinians as basically cannon fodder. Our lives are more important than their lives. Gazans not suspected of terrorism are detained and sent. And first of all, do you know how completely innocent you need to be as a Palestinian to not be suspected of terrorism if you live in Gaza? Their rules of engagement are, if you're a male, you can get fired at, period.
Right.
This is from the Israeli press, Haaretz. Gazans not suspected of terrorism are detained and sent as human shields to search tunnels and houses before IDF soldiers enter with the full knowledge of senior Israeli officers, several sources say. IDF claims this practice is forbidden. They claim this to maintain their self-described title of being the most moral army in the world.
They forbade the Hannibal Directive in the mid-aughts or 2010s, and apparently that was
and
implemented on
Israeli
October 7th.
press has already reported that they, in fact, did engage the Hannibal Directive, which is to kill any Israelis, whether they are military or not, who look like they may be taken prisoner. At first, it's hard to recognize them, the piece writes. They're usually wearing Israeli uniforms. Many of them are in their 20s, and they're always with Israeli soldiers of various ranks. In other words, they dress them up as Israeli soldiers. But if you look more closely, you see most of them are wearing sneakers, not army boots. And their hands are cuffed behind their backs, and their faces are full of fear. The soldiers call each of them a sha'ish, an obscure Arabic word of Turkish origin meaning sergeant. Random Palestinians have been used by Israeli army units in the Gaza Strip for one purpose: to serve as human shields for soldiers during operations. We, I think, played a clip of some of this that may have come from Al Jazeera, if I remember correctly, months ago. And at that time, there seemed to be no one paying attention. Quote, our lives are more important than their lives, quote, soldiers were told. The thinking is it's better for the Israeli soldiers to remain alive and for the Sha'ashim to be the ones blown up by an explosive device. This description is one of many obtained by Haaretz, some from combat soldiers, other from commanders. The picture that emerges: in recent months, Israeli soldiers have used human shields in this way all over Gaza. Even the chief of staff's office knows it. Soldiers choose Gazans for the missions and bring them to the brigades and battalions operating in the Strip. There is pride in it, said a source who took part in some of the, quote, locating work. Quote, the senior ranks know about it, the source said. The army has played innocent, despite footage shown on Al Jazeera about 2 months ago. Israeli soldiers can be seen dressing Palestinian detainees in uniforms and flak jackets, putting cameras on them and sending them into badly damaged houses and tunnel entrances with their hands bound by plastic ties. The Americans are furious, according to this. Through Vendon Patel, a State Department spokesperson, has said that the Israeli Defense Forces is investigating the incidents and that the evidence in the videos does not reflect the IDF values and violates rules and regulations. You know that thing that we keep hearing on the campaign thing? When they tell you who they are, believe them? Quote, when I saw the report from Al Jazeera, I said, yes, it's true. End quote. A combat soldier in conscript IDF brigade who took part in the use of Gazans as human shields told Haaretz. And then I saw the IDF's response, which totally doesn't reflect reality. It's done with the knowledge of the brigade commander at the least. I mean, this about 5 months ago, 2 Palestinians were brought to us. One was 20, the other was 16. We were told, use them. They're Gazans. Use them as human shields. The soldiers said that in the IDF, they know it's not a one-time incident of a young and stupid company commander who decides on his own to take somebody. So in other words, they know this is systemic. This is not a one-off. This in and of itself should be enough to invoke the Leahy rule. Law. There's just only so long that this can be denied. And This isn't Haaretz. We should also be asking the question, why isn't it in the New York Times?
Yep.
Why isn't it in the Washington Post? Now, maybe it will be tomorrow, or maybe it'll just be mentioned offhandedly.
I can't wait for the first assessment of the American media in this time period, because I remember thinking, oh, we learned a lot of lessons from the run-up to the Iraq War. And no, it's the same, I think, malicious Borg.
I mean, this is, and it's, we're going to have to reckon with this. And I want Harris to win as much and more than probably a lot of people, frankly. But this stuff has to be addressed. And Harris campaign, I think ultimately, although it's unclear, it's really just going to be depending on how big of a story this becomes, is going to have to get a little closer to the line of where they perceive it's going to create some damage on their campaign or whatever reason. Now, I also think that it's quite possible there are dynamics that we just cannot see that may be inhibiting them. But I would keep your eye on the Twitter account of, what's his first name? Gordon? Is it Phil Gordon? Who is Harris's top national security advisor. He has a presidential title, but I think that is more often than not just simply a function of like sort of pro forma. This is a guy who was basically one of the biggest impetuses behind the Iranian nuclear deal. And just keep an eye on that Twitter. I can break down, and I think we've talked about the tweet that he put out there the other day. And we can put this up there. This is going to annoy people because it's a nuanced take. But I've seen others read this in the same way. And, we've talked about, I don't know, did we talk about this on air? About how cautious people like this are in the way that they use their language. And how specific, I wouldn't necessarily say legalistic, but very specific. And this was a week ago. Now, I don't know, we can argue as to like what the value of her coming out and saying, something at this juncture is. And you could argue that value both from an electoral standpoint, and you can argue that value from a actual impact on the ground standpoint. You can keep this up there because I want to read this. Phil Gordon wrote, the VP has been clear. She will always ensure Israel is able to defend itself against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups. Defend itself. She does not support an arms embargo on Israel. She will continue to work to protect civilians in Gaza and uphold international humanitarian law. Now, the policy options that range from doing nothing to an embargo on all arms, including defensive arms, to all arms, is rather large. You could send, Patriot missiles for Iron Dome or whatever it is, and then say, we're not going to send you any more planes. We're not going to send you any more tanks. We're not going to give you any more ammunition. We're not going to give you technology. We're not going to give you anything else. But that which is defensive specifically against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups. Defensive. I'm not saying that she has plans to do any of these things. All I'm just telling you is that this guy wrote this specifically. He could have written She will always be, she does not support an arms embargo on Israel. He could have also written, she does not support conditioning military aid to Israel, but he didn't write that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways. You could have ended it after defend itself instead of against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups, although the Iran-backed makes me worry about Hezbollah.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And then, she'll continue to work to protect civilians in Gaza and uphold international humanitarian law. He's saying international law. When you look at her comments, she says they have a responsibility, a moral responsibility. When you start to invoke law, that's when you see things starting to get serious. Not moral responsibility. Because then, who's the arbiter of moral and what does responsibility mean and all this? So I'm not suggesting that anything other than I think there is room to push Harris. I don't know how much of a material difference you're going to get in terms of what happens on the ground with the U.S. foreign policy, because I don't think she is in a position to shape that at this moment. She can't go in and say, I'm the vice president, Biden, do what I say. That's not happening. And again, we don't know what the dynamics are in terms of these relations. But if she wanted to be more full-throated against conditioning aid, she easily could have been. And this would have been the guy who was delivering that message. But it's good. I hope she continues to get pressure. I hope these stories get more traction in the media. Here is, this is sort of fascinating. In the wake of that Israeli attack on the school, where you've seen horrific images of just people blown to smithereens, children blown to smithereens. Sky News, Jane Secker, I don't know if we've ever seen anything she did. She's speaking with an Israeli spokesperson, David Menser. We have two clips. And, I'd like to see more of this on like American news media. Go ahead.
But what about the other 81 is my point.
There aren't any 81. That's the truth of the matter. There aren't any.
That is not what charities are saying there.
Right. So unfortunately, lots of people like UNRWA, which is also a charity, they actually participated in the
this is Save the Children. This isn't UNRWA.
So I don't know about Save the Children, but what I know is this is a PR battle. I've given you our intelligence. We know that 19 were killed. We're looking into if there were any other collateral damage, which of course we'll apologize for if that is the case. But what I'm telling you is we can say categorically when we fired these precise munitions, calibrated perfectly to get precisely to the terrorists, to make sure there aren't any civilian casualties, there weren't any other civilians in the area. So any other, ideas which might come afterwards, it's incumbent on world media to be critical, to look at these issues with a critical eye, because Hamas have a history of lying. I mean, none of us here in Israel are surprised. They raped our families. They burnt whole families alive. It's no big surprise that they happen to be liars as well. But I understand for Western media.
All right, first off, she's not citing Hamas. Let's just let's take this the low-hanging fruit here. She's citing Save the Children. The guy admits this is a public relations war. Then he goes on to say Hamas lies, Israel lies. They lied about the Hannibal Directive. I'm just going by what the Israeli press says. They lied about using Palestinians as human shields. This is just what we talked about today. This is just what we talked about today. That was reported in the Israeli press. They apparently Hamas does not have the market cornered on rape. We've seen video of Israeli soldiers
It's debated as
taking
policy.
taking prisoners, holding up their shield so you can't see it, raping prisoners. They debated on their talk shows as to whether or not it's appropriate. We saw riots. Israeli civilians crashing through the gates of bases where they didn't even want the scapegoats to be to face accountability. Never mind, you don't have 15 Israeli soldiers holding up their shields in front of the video cameras to obscure what's going on and say, well, it's just a few bad apples. But the guy, at least to his credit, admits this is a PR war. And to the credit of this news presenter, Jane Secker, she basically says, well, you don't believe the Save the Children charity. You smear UNRWA, let the media in. And of course, they won't do that.
Almost nothing, no information leaves Gaza without it being cleared by...
It would help if international journalists were allowed in there by Israel, then we would be able to give independent verification, but you don't allow us in, so we can't. Can I just put one final point to you? Whatever happened on Saturday...
That's what you call a drive-by. Allow me to respond to that.
Let me just say also what where that term drive-by comes from. Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh. This guy, that was a term coined by Rush Limbaugh. Go back and let's do this again. I just thought that might be of interest.
Verification, but you don't allow us in, so we can't. Can I just put one final point to you? Whatever happened on Saturday...
That's what you call a drive-by. Allow me to respond to that when you make that accusation. This has been one of the most reported conflicts ever.
But not freely by the international media. The international media, Sky News, are only allowed in, accompanied by Israel, on very, very limited trips.
It is a very dangerous war zone for the safety of these journalists.
Pause it. Israel has killed over 160 journalists. The idea that this guy is like saying, we're doing this for your safety. Give me an effing break. They target journalists.
Yep.
Target journalists' families. Good.
Is a very dangerous war zone for the safety of these journalists, but we're keeping them out. But we will let them in.
That's a decision that you've just acknowledged. You are keeping them out.
No, the decision I'm taking, I'm telling you about, is that we're focusing on bringing our hostages home. That's what our emphasis is, because the story's getting out. I mean, you see them on your screens every single moment of every single day. So the story is getting out. So this idea that it isn't getting out is ridiculous. It's on our front screens all the time.
But it's hard because if I say a fact and then you say it's Hamas, we can't independently verify it because you won't let us in. So it becomes a circular argument, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Well done by her.
Stephen Semler at the top of the month, at beginning of August, from the Committee to Protect Journalist Data, journalists since October 7th have been killed. 108 journalists have been killed by Israeli forces since October 7th. Journalists killed by anyone else is 17. That is 9 in 10 journalists killed since October 7th were killed by Israel.
Only 108?
That's per the Committee to Protect Journalists data on 2nd of August, 2024. So that includes media workers, but it might be greater now. It probably is.
And then, she nails him on the decision to keep journalists out. We're focused on the hostages. You should tell the Israeli press that, because the Israeli press doesn't believe that. New documents have shown that every time they get close to a ceasefire deal to release the hostages, Netanyahu steps in and changes the deal.
Total victory time.
They don't want a deal, and they also don't want to find out why X number of hostages have died in Gaza. They've died because of Israeli weapons blowing them up, or in some cases, actually, Israelis shooting them. All right, let's go to the phones. Folks, you can be a part of this program by calling in on the phone system that we have, 646-257-3920. The phones are now open. The answer is, our phone line's open. Yes, Ms. Zarv, they are right now. If Kamala got us to refund to UNRWA, I would not only tell everyone I know to vote her, but I'll give her my firstborn, like Spike Biden's applesauce, and force some signatures on executive orders. Galaxy. Yeah, I mean, the problem is, she can't do that. She can't do anything other than campaign on a specific policy, I guess. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.